What's up, guys? This is Mr. Eldridge, and in today's lesson, we're going to look at social theories and currency issues of the Gilded Age. Social Darwinism was an extension of Darwin's theories on natural selection extended to society. It essentially believed the rich were better and genetically fit for survival, and the poor were either genetically inferior intellectually or lacked the work ethic required for success in society. The belief justified the position of Westerners atop the world as the most technologically, socially, and economically advanced nation in the world. Furthermore, social Darwinism was used to justify the position of the rich atop society as a, quote, natural process by which the strongest, i.e., the middle class, would survive and thrive, and the weak, the working class, would struggle and perish. Social Darwinism also implied that exploitation or mistreatment of the poor was acceptable, as these people were genetically undeserving, and that the accumulation of wealth and its use by the rich, as opposed to redistribution or charity, was just. Europeans and Americans also held the same view, that the domination of the superior civilizations was a natural and necessary process for the improvement of the world, justifying what we're going to talk about in regards to imperialism. It wasn't genocidal. Westerners believed converting natives to their culture, as well as exploiting them, both religiously, economically, socially, was beneficial to all groups. Such cultural and economic reforms were implemented against the will of native peoples and states. In the United States, you're going to see a series of laws being passed that are often called either sterilization or eugenics laws. Eugenics is the study of how to arrange reproduction within a human population to increase the occurrence of heritable characteristics regarded as desirable. Developed largely by Sir Francis Galton as a method of improving the human race, eugenics was increasingly discredited as unscientific and racially biased during the 20th century, especially after the adoption of its doctrines by the Nazi Party in Germany in order to justify their treatment of Jews, disabled people, and other minority groups. The United States will also see its fair share of eugenics and sterilization laws. Culmination of this was in 1927 in the landmark Supreme Court case Buck versus Bell. Carrie Buck was considered a feeble-minded woman who was committed to a state mental institution. Her condition had been present in her family for the last 3 generations. There was a Virginia law that allowed for the sexual sterilization of inmates of institutions to promote, quote, the health of the patient and the welfare of society. Or the procedure could be performed, a hearing was required to determine whether or not the operation was a wise thing to do. This case will go all the way to the United States Supreme Court. The court found that the statute in the state of Virginia did not violate the Constitution. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes affirmed the value of a law like the one in Virginia in order to prevent the nation from, quote, being swamped with incompetence. And he said, quote, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. When we talk about the politics of this era, and you talk about one major group that will be very important, we must talk about the People's Populist Party. Organized in the 1890s in Kansas, most members were from the Midwest and the South, mostly unhappy farmers with both major parties. They drew members from multiple groups, such as the Farmers' Alliances, the Grange, and the Knights of Labor. They felt that the federal government needed to be more involved, not less involved. They supported suffrage, direct election of senators, the graduated income tax, government ownership of railroads, improving working conditions in factories, immigration restrictions, 8-hour workdays, recognition of unions, and easier access to credit. And specifically, they are going to support the notion of bimetallism that will become a major part of the election of 1896 between William Jennings Bryan and William McKinley. Another major group that's going to be important during this time period was the Greenback Labor Party. They were around from 1868 to 1888. They were farmers that wanted to maintain or increase the amount of paper money in circulation. Greenbacks, if you will, these are paper money not backed by gold, helped to finance the Union cause during the Civil War. Federal government wanted to retire the greenbacks after the war, but farmers wanted to keep them to keep those prices high. Of course, we've talked about the Panic of 1873 takes place, polarized the country on paper currency. Most Americans wanted more greenbacks or an unlimited coinage of silver, which will be pushed by the People's Populist Party and start what we call the Free Silver Movement. In 1875, you're going to see what's called the Resumption Act. The greenbacks could be redeemed for gold by the federal government. They did see some success in the election of congressmen and state and local elections. Both groups are going to see that, but no real major national impact. Finally, we need to discuss the currency issues going during the end of this period. Following the Civil War, there were many disagreements on how to maintain the United States' financial policy and money supply. Some Americans, such as the Greenback Party that we just discussed, argued for the expansion of a printed money market, such as the successful use of printed treasury notes by the Union during the Civil War. Many Americans, however, were religiously attached or even obsessed with gold and silver. Such groups distrusted bank notes and treasury notes, citing that the papers were themselves worthless without faith in the institution. On the other hand, gold and silver, they argued, were universally exchanged. Such beliefs resulted in policies such as the Sherman Silver Purchase Act in 1890 that required the United States Treasury to purchase 4.5 million ounces of silver per month in order to stabilize and protect and increase the United States money supply that was going to be backed with silver. The Sherman Silver Purchase Act was mostly a response to the deflation experienced in the agricultural sector, and so believe proponents the purchasing of silver would cause inflation and allow citizens to repay their debts. The consequences were that the artificially overvalued currency in silver drove the artificially undervalued currency of gold out of circulation. In the metal markets, silver was worth less than the government's legal exchange rate for silver versus gold. So, investors bought silver, exchanged it at the treasury for gold dollars, and then sold these gold dollars in the metals market for more than they paid for the silver. Investors took the profits on this transaction and bought more silver. They did this over and over until the treasury ran out of gold and contributed significantly to the financial collapse in 1893. After the Panic of 1893 broke, President Grover Cleveland oversaw the repeal of the act to prevent the depletion of the government's gold reserves. Andrew Carnegie felt as though there was so much money being made by the top 1% of classes that something had to be done with this money, and that good needed to come out of all of this money for the betterment of society. So, in 1889, Andrew Carnegie is going to pen The Gospel of Wealth, an article that describes the responsibility of philanthropy by the new upper class of the self-made rich. Carnegie proposed that the best way of dealing with the new phenomenon of wealth inequality was for the wealthy to utilize their surplus means in a responsible and thoughtful manner. This approach was contrasted with traditional bequest, i.e., patrimony, if you will, where wealth is handed down to heirs and other forms of bequest. The essay itself was a reflection of a shifting attitude on wealth, in that while one could certainly acquire it and retain their morality, it would require them to use that wealth to benefit the less fortunate, much opposed to the justified exploitation and gluttony promoted by social Darwinism. Carnegie and others believed it was a moral obligation to pursue said wealth for the purpose of improving the lives of others. This is largely why you're going to see facilities like Carnegie Hall, the Rockefeller Center. An example, Andrew Carnegie is going to give millions of dollars for the building of libraries. Education was very important to him, and so he wanted to ensure that that money was used for the purpose of education.